We're in a series called Kingdom Service, which Doug talked a little bit about. I heard Jeff kicked it off in here last week and talked a little bit of smack about me. So I'm going to talk a little bit of smack about some other people. No, I'm kidding. He was nice. Exactly right. So the idea is that if we are to become fully devoted followers of Jesus, which is our mission statement here at Orchard, one of the things that we need to do is follow him into kingdom service, into Jesus' kind of service, which of course was centered on himself. It was Christ-centered. He was always inviting people into a relationship with him, into new life with him. Kingdom service is all about relationships and reconciling people to God and people to each other. It's focused on the whole person, which I'm going to talk about this morning, not only their spirit or their soul. God cares about the entire person. And kingdom service, we believe, is designed for the development of people, both those who are serving and those who are being served. And this morning I want to look at the idea that Jesus, in the ways that he served and called his followers to serve, cared about the whole person, mind, body, and soul. And he calls his followers to do the same. And I want to explore this through a really hard teaching of Jesus. Perhaps one of the hardest teachings of Jesus to hear and to think about ever. And so if you want to leave right now and pretend you have to go to the restroom or go get some coffee or go down to the sanctuary and hear a different teaching, now's your chance. Anybody? And I didn't want to teach this text. I didn't want to teach this passage of Jesus. Trust me. God and I had a run-in, and obviously he won. But what helped me in pressing forward with this was reminding myself that Jesus was a prophet. And one of the primary things that prophets did was they announced things that caused their hearers to think. And that often made them uncomfortable, and that disrupted their life, and that possibly pointed them in a new direction. And so, the truth is Jesus is kind, and Jesus is loving, and Jesus is good, but Jesus was never a self-help guru. He was never just kind of a feel-good therapist. He was a prophet. And so his words, even today, are probably going to disrupt us and cause us to think hard about the direction of our lives and possibly encourage us to point in a new direction. So I encourage you to fasten your seatbelts and put your helmets on, knee guards, shin guards, arm guards, whatever you need. And I'm going to wear these reading glasses for the first time ever, and so I don't want to hear anything, okay? Because if I don't put these on, I'm just going to make up what's in here. So let's think together about what Jesus might be saying to us this morning. When I look out then at you, I can't see you, so this is awesome. I can just see the scriptures. Matthew 25. These are the words of Jesus, starting with verse 31. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. And all the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now let me just stop here. I don't know much about sheep and goats, except that when I was a little girl, I was at some kind of petting zoo, and a goat started to eat my dress. And I cried, and then I think my mom hit it over the head with her purse and rescued me. That's all I have to say about sheep and goats. Anyway, that was neither here nor there. He will separate the sheep from the goats, and he will put the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those on the right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to me." And then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go visit you?" And the king will reply, "Truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. And then he will say to those on his left, depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. And they will also answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? When did that happen? And he will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me. Then they will go away to eternal punishment, but the righteous to eternal life. Now, Jesus tells this story, which on the surface, right, appears to be about the last judgment. At least that's where my mind goes, because that's scary. But it is not primarily a story about the last judgment. It is primarily a story about how Jesus wants his followers to live in order to be ready for his return. Now, how do I know that? Just before he tells this story, Jesus tells 3 other parables that are all obviously meant to teach his followers about how to be alert and prepared for Jesus' return. You can look at that when you go home. The front part of Matthew 25 and then even into Matthew 24. And this story flows right out of those 3 parables. Jesus is using this story to explain to his followers how they can be ready for his return. Now, for me, the best way that I can operationalize this really hard text is to see it as if Jesus were a professor in the most important class ever at the University of Life. And he's saying to those of us who signed up for his class, I'm about to tell you what's on the final. And I don't want you to be shocked or caught off guard when the final comes. I just want you to know what's going to be on the final, and I'm about to tell it to you. And if you're a smart student, told this to my kids before, with even the smallest amount of common sense. You do not say, the final's too scary. I don't want to know about the final. I don't want to know what's going to be on it. I'm just going to do what I always do and study how I always study. But Jesus is saying, listen to me now, because I'm going to tell you what is on the final. And I'm going to address this a little bit, but, the temptation when we read a story like this to say, I'm just covered by grace, so I don't have to read this particular teaching of Jesus. No, we have to look at it. Standing in grace, we have to look at stuff like this, because this is what's going to be on the final. So what is Jesus trying to say to us here? What is he telling us about how he wants us to live in the world? And I think there are 3 things. The first is that faith in God, faith in Jesus, is lived out in how we treat our neighbors, especially our vulnerable and needy neighbors. Absolutely. Saved by grace through faith. But faith is more than just believing the right things. In the book of James, we read this. Same kind of idea. James chapter 2, verse 14. What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if people claim to have faith but have no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food, and if one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. See, Scripture is making this really important point for us to understand, that there is this link between our faith in the gift of grace given to us through Christ, and then how we go on to live in this world. And especially, there's this link between our faith in grace to how we go on to treat our neighbor in this world. And this story of Jesus does not mean we have to sell everything we have and give to the poor. Even Jesus did not do that, though he didn't have very much. Instead, I think a story like this means more like how Rich Stearns put it. Rich Stearns runs World Vision now. He said this, he said, the question for you and me that this story of the sheep and goats should bring up is this: will Christ find evidence in our lives for genuine concern for his beloved poor when he looks at the overall fruit of our life? Will he find tangible expressions of concern for the least of these woven into the overall fabric of our lives? See, these are challenging questions. But Jesus is so good to us by telling us what's going to be on the final. So I'm working on this teaching last weekend on the plane as we were headed out to Philadelphia, again, to see Will. It was Parents' Weekend. We had to go. I had to make sure he had washed his sheets and generally was functioning. So I was working on this teaching on the plane, but I forgot about it when I landed, right? Because I'm on vacation. But God did not forget about it. And so as Chuck and we landed, we were going to grab some lunch. We're walking through the center of Philadelphia, and I'm immediately struck by how many homeless people I see. And all of a sudden, this teaching of Jesus pops back into my head, and I knew God wanted me to pay attention, which is so dangerous. So I alerted Chuck, and Chuck thought, our vacation's over, because in order for Alice to feel okay about doing this teaching, we have to walk throughout Philadelphia and give all of our money away. But we both knew, and we had this discussion over lunch, we both knew that even if we did that, even if we gave every single dollar we have to every single street person in Philadelphia, it would not solve their problems. And that we had developed a policy a long time ago of not simply tossing money at people in need so that we can appease our guilt, but instead to strategically give to Christian organizations that develop and empower and support people to move them off the street. And Dave's going to talk about that in here in a couple weeks. So I thought after lunch, after Chuck and I had this great discussion, that I was off the hook, right? I saw the homeless people. God wanted me to have compassion for them, and I did, and that's enough, right, God? Wrong. So after lunch, when we're not even in Philadelphia for 3 hours, I'm really not going to teach on hard stuff anymore. And I'm sitting in our hotel lobby, downtown Philadelphia. Chuck went upstairs to make a call. I'm waiting for Will to come. And as is typical of me, I'm trying to sit there and appear to be really hip and like urban cool. This is in my own mind. I'm sure it's not going very well from the outside, but that's what I was doing. I was sipping some water and I was just watching people. When so gradually, I realized that a woman was in a very distraught conversation on her cell phone across the coffee table from me. And just gradually, I realized that her son was in the hospital or needed to be in the hospital, and she needed to get to him to sign some papers. And she was on the phone with someone, maybe her husband or her mother, trying to get them to leave work and come get her and take her to the hospital. And I watched her say, "Oh, that's okay. I'll figure it out." And she hung up the phone, put her head in her hands right in front of me across the table. It was literally as if God himself was in the lobby looking at me. And you guys might be thinking, I'm all outgoing and stuff, and I know how to do these kinds of things, but these situations just paralyze me. I mean, this is stuff Tim Butker does, right? He's always got a story about some stranger he talked to. This isn't really my gig, but I was suddenly gripped by what I knew I needed to do, and with fear and trembling that she was going to think I was a religious wingnut, I leaned across the coffee table and just said to her, "Do you need a taxi?" I mean, that wasn't hard. And she looked up at me with huge surprised eyes, and she said, "I don't know, I just need to get to the hospital. I need to sign admission papers for my son. He's having a hard time breathing." And I said to her, "This might sound really weird, but I think God wants me to give you money for a taxi because he sees you and he loves you." And she started to cry. And I'm thinking, oh, I think this is working. So I gave her money, and she gave me a huge hug and took off to find a taxi. And God said to me, "I love you, Alice, but I also love people in need, and one of the primary ways I love them is through my followers' obedience. And you see, your faith in me is lived out in how you treat your neighbors, especially those who are vulnerable. So now you can go pretend to be urban, hip, and cool, okay? But I keep alive because I have stuff for you to do." And then Will showed up, and I'm like, "Don't tell your dad." I told him. But here's the truth. Faith in God is lived out in how we treat our neighbors. That's what Jesus wants us to know. Secondly, the story shows us that Jesus cares for basic human needs. He cares about them for all people. He cares about them for you and for me. But he especially cares for people in this world who don't have enough. And he desires that his followers help people with their most basic needs. And I don't know about you, but when I read passages like this, I want to pretend they don't apply to me. I want to say to myself, this can't be Jesus' call on all of us, right? Aren't just special people like our mission team or Laura Hoy or Mother Teresa, aren't those kind of people called to this? Because I know Jeff tried to pass me off last week as a saint, but I took a family poll to see if I could qualify for sainthood, and may I just report, they have not stopped laughing. The truth about me is I just want to be a regular, safe follower of Jesus and come to church and just be a nice person and then get about my life. But the hard truth of this story is that none of us is let off the hook. Not a one. But here's the good news, and I want you to pay attention to this. Every single one of us can live out this teaching. Because this isn't a story about big miracles. These are everyday, simple acts of service that Jesus describes here. Things we can live out in our homes and our neighborhoods and our workplaces. As one Bible scholar pointed out, we don't read things like, I was sick and you miraculously healed me, or I was in prison and you broke the bars and set me free. No, we read this. Jesus said, I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. I was thirsty and you offered me a drink. Basic needs, simple kindness. Now, Jesus wasn't creating a checklist here. We can't say, okay, I fed one hungry person, and I'm sure at some point in time I gave some thirsty people water. Does giving out Gatorade at a 5K count, do you think, for this kind of a thing? We don't get to just make a checklist. These are just illustrations of what matter to Jesus. Unselfish acts of service toward those in the world that most often get overlooked. And again, John writes about this in 1 John 3. This is a very compelling passage. 1 John 3, starting with verse 11 and then going on to 16 through 18. John says, "For this is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. And this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. If any of you has material possession and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in you? Dear children, let us not love with words or tongue, but with actions and in truth." Jesus cares about every single human being's basic human needs. And you and I are called to care too. And not only to care, but in ways big and small, to act. And last but not least, in this story, Jesus tells us that when we serve others and we see their need and we do what we can to meet their need, we are in some mysterious way serving him. We are in some mysterious way in his presence. And I so often have the privilege of talking with people here about their faith. And I very often hear from a lot of us that God seems distant, that God seems absent from their lives even. They don't hear or see or feel Jesus anymore. And so, what we tend to do is start buying new books, or maybe going to a conference, or trying a new method of prayer, downloading some new good songs on our iPod, or maybe complaining about the church because it's not helping us to find Jesus, while all the while Jesus' word testifies to us about where he can be found. In the story of the sheep and the goats, if you remember, the righteous folks who were rewarded by Jesus for serving the vulnerable were just as shocked about what they had done as those who had failed to see the vulnerable. And they said to the king, "When did we see you, Jesus? When did we see you thirsty and hungry and sick? And when did we do those nice things for you? We don't even know what you're talking about." And Jesus says, Matthew 25, verse 40, the king will reply, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. He's saying to them, I was present there. And here's another part of that same mystery. When we serve Christ in our vulnerable neighbor, our own poverty-stricken souls are very often first revealed to us and then filled and healed. I experienced this in my little tiny volunteer role with the Orchard Hill Church Youth Art Team, which is this amazing community art program led by Heidi Footman, who's a member of our church. It takes place in Waterloo at the Harvest Vineyard right across from East High in the Walnut neighborhood on Sunday afternoons. And the truth is, if I'm honest with you guys, I'm tired on Sunday afternoons. And I don't want to go and serve. But I need to go. Because it is so easy for me to stay home, blind, comfortable, wrapped up in my own little issues, insulated from the world and full of excuses about why I can't go. But when I stay home, my soul stays hungry and thirsty and naked and sick and in prison and lonely, imprisoned by my own selfishness. But here's the strange chemistry of the kingdom of God. Whenever I take my tired, needy self into the midst of children who just need the basics, and I partner with my brothers and sisters in Christ to love and to serve, I go there in all my privileged ego, thinking I am bringing Jesus to those who need me to bring them Jesus. And yet I'm the one who comes face to face with Christ. And my soul is fed and watered and clothed and healed in Christ's presence. And I'm filled with the joy of kingdom community. And every time it happens, it's a miracle. Because what Jesus tells us in this story is true. When we pour out what he has freely given to us on those who, for whatever reason, are vulnerable in this world, we are in the presence of Jesus and we are made whole. You see, the truth is, it's my need that drives me to go, as much as it is my desire to obey and, to be honest with you, a tiny bit of fear of being found a goat at the end of my life. You know? And Jesus, in his goodness and his kindness and in his abundance, meets my needs as I humbly obey him by meeting the needs of those around me in just a tiny way. And you and I can do this in every area of our life, in our homes, our workplaces, our neighborhoods, in our circle of friends. But let me just close by saying this by way of giving a little nudge to all of us. Because the truth is, too many of us, myself included, are way too comfortable. If in the circles that you and I run in, we never have contact with another human being who is hungry or thirsty or needs clothing, and I don't mean a quick trip to Jordan Creek Mall, or a person who's sick or lonely or in prison, if we never have contact with people like that, then I believe Jesus would say to us today, yes, love those closest to you well. I honor that. But also go. Take your kids with you. Don't use them as an excuse. And go and meet me in the faces of those outside your own circles. For staying removed from the needy and the poor creates its own kind of poverty in our souls and its own kind of hunger. And Jesus says, I love you too much to watch your souls starve to death. God cares about the needs of us all. He always has, and he always will. And he's creating a community, a kingdom, so to speak, filled with followers of his, so grateful that they have been saved by grace, that they consider it pure privilege to meet needs of others, especially those without the basics. And no matter how awesome we think we are for going and giving, The truth is that we, the ones who think we have it all, it is we who are given the immense privilege of coming face to face with Jesus as we look into the eyes of the hungry and the thirsty and the naked and the sick, and we say to them, I don't have much, but I can share a cup of cold water, and I can split my sandwich in half and give you part, and I can sew a pillow slip dress, and I can visit you when you're sick. And in doing those things, our own poor, poor, poor souls will become rich. Amen. Let's pray. God, sometimes your word is hard. And then we like to do kind of a mental gymnastics of pretending it doesn't apply to us. You couldn't have meant what you really said. And I spend a lot of my time doing that, and I'm sorry. Your word is hard, but your word is good, and it is true. And so I pray that in some way my words did not get in the way of your word, and that your word penetrated our hearts and reminded us what's going to be on the final, and reminded us how much we need you and how much the world needs you. Amen.